Python data types. In this video, we will learn about what are data types in Python, examples for each data type in Python, how to get the data type of an object in Python. What are data types in Python? Data types specify the type of object or nature of the object. Based on the data type, it can have specific behavior. Python has around 8 categories of data types. There is only one data type that can store text content. str is for string values which can store text content. There are 3 data types that can store numeric values. Int is for integer values like 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, -9, -20, etc. Float is for storing floating point numbers like 3.1415, 1.732, 1.414, etc. Complex data type is for complex numbers that have real and imaginary parts. Usually, complex numbers are used in scientific calculations. Next category is sequence types. These are collections that store objects in a sequence. You can access individual objects using the position of the object in the sequence. There are 3 types: list, tuple, and range. List is an ordered collection of objects where you can add objects, update objects, or remove objects from a list. Therefore, list is mutable. Tuples is an ordered collection of objects where you cannot add new objects or you cannot remove existing objects from a tuple. Tuple is immutable. Range is a sequence of numbers with a specific start, specific end, and a step value. In the mapping type, there is dictionary. Dictionary is a collection of mappings which are key value pairs. And keys must be distinct in a dictionary. Coming to the set types, these are collections of unique objects. Set is modifiable while frozen set is not. Boolean type can have either a true or false. Coming to the binary types, we have bytes, byte array, and memory weave. Byte and byte arrays are used to manipulate binary data. Memory weave can access the memory of other binary objects without copying the actual data. And finally, none type can have only one value, and that is none. Examples for each data type in Python. Example for string data type. You can either use a string literal or use str built-in function to define a string type object. Example for integer data type. You can either use an integer value or use int built-in function to define an integer type object. Example for float data type. You can either use a floating point value or use float built-in function to define a float type object. Example for complex data type. You can either specify the real and imaginary parts or use complex built-in function to define a complex data type. Example for list data type. You can either use a square brackets with the objects specified between them separated by comma, or use the list built-in function to define a list type object. Example for tuple data type. You can either use opening and closing parentheses with objects specified between them, or use a tuple built-in function to define a tuple type object. Example for range data type. You can use a range built-in function to define a range type object. Example for dictionary data type. You can either use a curly braces with key value pairs, or use dictionary built-in function DICT to define a dictionary type object. Example for set data type. You can either use a curly braces, opening and closing curly braces with objects specified in between them, or use a set built-in function to define a set type object. Example for frozen set data type. You can use frozen set built-in function to define a frozen set type object. Example for Boolean data type. You can either use Boolean values true or false, or use bool built-in function to define a Boolean type object. Examples for bytes data type. You can either use bytes with a B prefix, or use bytes built-in function to define a bytes type object. Example for byte array data type. You can use byte array built-in function to define a byte array type object. Example for memory weave data type. You can use memory weave built-in function to define a memory weave type object. Example for none type. You can use none value directly to assign to a variable to define a none type object. How to get the type of object in Python? Type built-in function takes a variable as argument and returns a type object specifying the type of data stored in the variable. You can print this type object to output using a print statement. Thank you for watching the video. If our content has been helpful in understanding about the data types in Python, please like the video and subscribe to our channel.